Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan McGuire, Director of Professional Development at ACCE, and I'm happy to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar. The webinar will be led by Sydney Doctor and Alana Turner of Greater Louisville, Inc. Sydney and Alana will be discussing their Chamber's sponsorship program, including their annual Sponsorship Opportunities Guide, which offers creative and flexible options for members to partner with the Chamber based on their individual budgeting and marketing goals. Before I turn the program over to Sydney and Alana, I have a few housekeeping notes. First, attendees are in listen-only mode during the webinar to avoid background noise. And second, after the presentation, we'll have time for some questions. You can ask the questions by using the question function of the webinar. The question box is on the lower right-hand corner of your screen on the webinar panel. Just type in your question, and I will read the question to Sydney and Alana. If we run out of time and don't get to your question, or if you have a question that you prefer to discuss with us individually offline, please feel free to contact Sydney or Alana directly. Their contact information will be included in the presentation. We here at ACCE can also get in touch with you afterwards after the webinar. And third, this webinar is being recorded and it will be up on the ACC website on the ACCE University webinar page no later than Monday, April 29th. The webinar presentation slides are uploaded to the webinar panel on the right-hand side of your computer screen. If you click on the box that says handouts, you can then click on the presentation to download it to your computer. If you can't download it for whatever reason, or you prefer not to during the webinar, that's fine. I will post the presentation slides along with the webinar recording. So, with that, I would like to introduce our two speakers today. First, Sydney Doctor is Director of Events at GLI and deals with all things logistics and content for the Chamber's 70 events per year. Starting as an event coordinator 7 years ago, she continues to grow in her leadership role and loves learning innovative ideas and being pushed outside the norm when working with Chamber events. Her favorite GLI event is to plan their intercity leadership visit each year, as well as their new diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Outside of the office, Sydney competes in triathlons, coaches a local master's swim teams, and travels as much as she can. Alana Turner joined GLI in January as the sponsorship sales manager and brings to the team a background in marketing, sales, and special events. Originally from Long Island, New York, Alana worked in corporate events and sales in Princeton, New Jersey, and later transitioned to the nonprofit sector, spending 2 years as the Director of Development and Marketing for Big Brothers Big Sisters in the Kentucky and Indiana region. Outside of work, she enjoys baking, has 2 very snuggly cats, and she recently returned from her honeymoon in Japan and is back to finding creative ways to plug sponsors into events. So Sydney and Alana, we're delighted to have you this afternoon. And at this point, I will pass the presentation over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. We are excited to be here and excited that all of you are joining us this afternoon. So I will go ahead and dive right in to be conscious of everybody's time. As we start the presentation, just want to give you a little bit of background on our chamber and where we are. We are Greater Louisville, Inc. in Louisville, Kentucky, and we are the largest metro chamber in our region. We have about 36 employees, and from this beautiful photo, you can see that we are located right on the Ohio River, which separates us from southern Indiana. As I mentioned, we're a 15-county bi-state region, so we serve both 5 counties in southern Indiana and 10 in Kentucky. GLI as a whole is focusing on 4 areas of focus. Those are going to be listed here. We serve as the regional business community's voice. We drive job creation and entrepreneurship. We support workforce and talent development, and we advocate on issues that impact the region's competitiveness. Just to give a little validity to our discussion today, here are some of our notable accolades. GLI was awarded the Chamber of the Year in 2007 and again was a finalist in 2018. We are looking forward to hopefully being named a finalist again in 2019, which I think we're going to hear about hopefully sometime early May. and was just recognized as a 5-star accredited chamber by the U.S. chamber, and with only 3% of chambers being awarded with this distinction, this was something that we were very proud to receive. We are made up of approximately 1,500 and growing number of investors. We have a number of notable companies here in our region, and you can see their logos, some of which are included in this. We have, the large-scale companies such as Humana and UPS. We are a bourbon-loving region as well, but approximately 35 to 40% of our investors are made up of small businesses. So we make sure to build our sponsorship packages to accommodate all the budget ranges. And as you'll hear a little bit later, how we go into customization of those packages and budget dependence. So just to kind of give you a little bit of an outline of what we're going to cover today, here is our agenda, and we'll be going through this kind of as we go. So this first section is kind of who does what and how we're organized just internally. So a number of years ago, we decided to centralize all of our events processing. We are a little bit on the larger size of a chamber, so I will just kind of make note that while this process works for us, you may need to scale our process either up or down based on the size of your chamber. Both the events and the sponsorship roles at GLI have shifted over our years. And so about 8 years ago, all of the departments planned, executed, and sold their own events, which really led to different experiences for each of the attendees that would attend our events. So our Entrepreneur Center, our Public Policy team, our Economic Development team, they were all reaching out, planning their events, and selling their own sponsorships. We really felt that that was too many cooks in the kitchen, and as I mentioned, the attendee was getting a different experience at each of the events that they would go to. So we really centralized this planning and now have one events team and one sponsorship manager who covers all of the events from logistics to sponsorships across the board. So again, that just really streamlines the process. It makes sure that the sponsors specifically have one point of contact throughout our organization. So we will have a couple of these as we go through our presentation as well. This is what we're calling our GLI Quick Tip. And this is just to kind of stop thinking as of your sponsorship manager as part of your events team. Rather, think of them as a revenue generator. Some of you may be super small chambers, and you may be doing it all, which is great, because, again, you are their one point of contact. However, if you are able to scale up a little bit, really having somebody dedicated to a sponsorship role is a great way to ensure that customer service to your sponsors and to your investors. Another thing that we decided to do a couple of years ago is reduce the number of events. As you can see, in 2017, we were doing approximately 100 events a year, and then we have slowly started to reduce the number of events. During our reorganization, we really reconsidered the purpose of these events. We streamlined these down to roughly about 60, starting to creep up a smidge, but really started to ensure that the purpose of the event was financially viable, wasn't being covered elsewhere in our market, and also had a direct tie back to GLI's strategy.
So moving right along, we are going to now talk just in general about our process. Our process for our sponsorship, as well, along with our positions, has evolved. As Susan mentioned earlier, I joined the team in January, and this is Alana. And my first step in building our 2019 portfolio of event sponsors was to renew as many sponsors as possible from 2018. I'm sure you all are aware of the old adage that it's easier to keep a customer than to create a new one. But it's an old adage because it is very true. I cannot stress this enough, renewal first. When you're thinking about your sponsorships, if you're really If this isn't coming to you as something that you already know, I'd really say to take this away from the presentation. There are companies that have already an interest. The second step in my process is to comb through our investor pool. These companies already have an interest in our chamber. So you may be thinking that they're already paying for membership, maybe they don't want to invest more, but they're paying for a membership because they believe in what your chamber is doing. So it's likely that they may want to deepen their engagement with you and consider a sponsorship of an event, a series, or a program. So I like to first look at our top investors, and then within that category, those who are longtime supporters. So we have some investors who have really been here for over 20 years. Clearly, they see a value, and they maybe aren't engaged with our events as heavily, so I like to make sure that they're included. If they're not already sponsoring, this is also just a new way to engage them again in your events. They may be an investor for so long that they've kind of stopped coming to those. So I think it's a good place to just continue to involve them. As I mentioned, here are just some quick pieces on renewal. In 2019, we've renewed over 60 sponsorships already, and we're just in our second quarter. So understanding that we've got a long way to go, we've really taken that first step, and it's really impacted our bottom line. And then just a quick fun fact, one of our longest running sponsors is on their 20th year in the same program. So what that tells us is, one, they enjoy that program. They find that it's a good return on investment for them. But if we're changing it up considerably and able to really give them something new each year, they're going to continue to come back. Next, I'm going to go over the evolution of our sponsorship packets so that you have something really tangible to look at while we're talking through our process. So last year, before my arrival, this was our sponsorship packet that we would give out for folks to look at our different events and choose. You can see it's 4 pages long. It's very word intensive. It's a lot to read. We recognize that in this day and age, we really need to make all of what we're putting out very consumable. And so we decided to reduce this packet down. We understood that the decision makers, they really needed good content, but maybe less content in making these decisions from an initial standpoint. So now we have a front and back 2-pager we've really reduced, and what this provides is just a short description of our event or series and the audience that it is directly targeting, because we recognize that that is something that a sponsor would need to know in making a decision. And then we typically like to just include the date or the time of year. We work with a lot of accounting firms. We understand that the first quarter is not the best time for them, so if they see something in the first quarter, they're typically not going to touch it. Also, we're from Louisville, and the Derby is a really popular time here for people, so we avoid things in May as well. So those are the 3 big pieces of information. Here's another GLI quick tip. Make your packet consumable. Make it easy for people to get through the information so that they're not spending too much time and getting bogged down with too many details that they don't need on first glance. Date, description, and audience, I think, are what you need to initially include. A little bit later on, I'm going to talk in depth about how we customize the sponsorship proposals and benefits once a company or investor voices interest in a specific program. Lastly, on this piece of our process, I do want to mention our timelines for sponsorship requests. We recognize that everyone is planning their budget at different times, but we see 2 big buckets of the year: those whose fiscal year and calendar year align, and those who fall on a true fiscal year. This is a short snapshot and it's very high level, but we like to make our full year requests in October, because that's when we know the majority of our investors and companies here locally are setting their budget. So if we're asking for whether it be $500 or $50,000, we like to make sure that they're building out that expectation into their budget, so that when it comes to the time of the event, whether it's in the first, second, third, or fourth quarter, they already know that ask is coming. In November, that's when we build our budgets and our investors and companies locally build their budgets. In December, we do a majority of our follow-ups. That's when, there's a lot of people out of the office for holidays. We like to just touch base with folks, and in January is when we finalize. This is really working well for us because it allows us to see, what events or programs or series are going to come in above budget, which is always great, or which are going to need some additional work to make sure that we're covering expenses appropriately. We follow the same schedule for our fiscal year, so right now I'm really working on all of our accounting firms and anyone who falls into that fiscal year budget because they're really planning for their 2019-2020 marketing dollars.
So just kind of moving right along, we're going to go into step 3 of our agenda, which talks about aligning events and sponsorships into the mission of your organization. So as I mentioned earlier, we have reduced the number of events that we are doing annually. As mentioned in the resource alignment section of ACCE's Horizon Initiative Chambers 2025 report, more and more chambers investors are looking to put their investment and sponsorship dollars into events that drive the mission of the chamber. And we really took this to heart. They want to see their ROI as being held to the chamber's mission, and we have really tried to do this within the last few years of our events. We really took a look at some of the events that we were doing, recognized that others in the marketplace were already doing them, and so we said, hey, you can have those events. We'll focus on what aligns best with our strategy. So this year, in 2019, we internally dubbed this the Year of Technology, and we announced this at our annual meeting, which was held in February. So, and again, to align that mission specifically for this year, we have really focused that theme throughout, and especially in 3 of our major event programs, which include our annual meeting, our State of Entrepreneurship event, and our inner city trip, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And this year we are going to San Francisco and Silicon Valley to study technology and scalability. So this call to action to our community really focuses on the future of technology and how these changes will affect the workforce in a tangible way that a lot of our investors can see. Companies with a technology presence or even local law firms who focus on patent law can immediately see the impact of their sponsorship dollars through our programming, which helps to educate and convenes the thought leadership around this topic. So a lot of you may or may not have a theme. Again, we just now dubbed this the Year of Technology. Last year we didn't have a theme, and some of you may not be doing that as well. So you may not have a theme or a strong area of focus for your chamber, but serve more as a networking organization, and alignment can still be implemented for your sponsors. A great example of this program alignment with an investor company is our new partnership with Papa John's on our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. Headquartered here in Louisville, Papa John's recently had a PR crisis surrounding derogatory comments made by their founder, which caused them to lose a lot of local support. They began their own rebranding, focusing on a new culture of inclusivity and equity, and understanding that they would need to rebrand and rebuild their own reputation in this area. We approached them to partner on our new DEI series, focusing on exactly what they needed at the time. So it was a logical partnership for them, and they came on board as the presenting sponsor of this series. So just to kind of wrap up the alignment piece, just really talk to your investors. At the end of the day, you may be able to help each other when it comes to the program alignment and the revenues. And lastly, if you are asking, if you're reducing the number of events, doesn't that also reduce the amount of sponsorship that you're bringing in? Well, not necessarily. As you can see from our numbers, we have reduced the quantity of events and improved their quality and our revenue has increased. There is a science behind the ACCE 2025 initiative, and we are the proof of that. So really take in consideration what each of your chambers are doing and taking a look at your programming and how that aligns with your sponsorships. And lastly, just make sure that you're budgeting correctly. We don't do events unless they're revenue generating. We set a revenue goal which includes sponsorships and registration fees at the beginning of the year when we're doing our budget. And kind of our own internal model is that sponsorship should cover the actual hard costs of your event, and then any registration fees should be your revenue and money in the bank. And then kind of lastly on how alignment also helps is in the world of trades. So while we're talking about revenue, I do want to touch on how we use trades in our own world planning our different events. So trades are a great way to cut expenses from your events, and we utilize trades with AV companies, venues, caterers, signage, and print companies, and really anything that we need to create the feel for our events. For our annual meeting this year, we worked with a new AV company in town, and they were eager to get in front of our business audience, but their initial cost proposal was far over our budget. We were able to cut their initial proposal from $50,000 to $20,000 by offering them complimentary seats at the event where they could network with potential clients. We added an ad for them in the event program, and then we've also partnered with them to list website advertising throughout the remainder of the year. And as something as simple as writing a positive review on their social media channels. Having the clout of us as a chamber to give them a positive review was something that they were very interested in doing, and I'm happy to write a positive review any day to help save $30,000.
Continuing on in our agenda, we are now going to look at the customization piece that I mentioned earlier. This concept definitely goes hand in hand with alignment. So as I showed you earlier, we had a 4-page document that we would give, and now we've reduced down to this 2-page document. From here, once someone says that they're interested in one of our programs or series, I dive a little deeper into what they're looking for in terms of budget, but also in terms of the benefits that they're looking for. And then I present them with a 1-page, more in-depth piece that, again, provides information on the event itself, and the date, and the audience, as mentioned before, but this also highlights our expected attendance and the benefits that they would receive with their investment. Here is another quick tip. Make sure you're talking to your sponsors. I often, whether I'm asking a sponsor for a sponsorship or I'm just checking in, I like to just see what other events that they are doing. They know what they might find valuable, and if they see it happening down the street, we want to make sure that we're staying current with what they're receiving. So if they get something from, whether it's another chamber that they're participating with as a national company or another organization here locally, if they're receiving something there that they prefer over ours, I want to make sure that we take that into consideration. Here's a breakdown of our benefits. The first one is our high impact opportunities, and this is what you would see on my more detailed piece after someone expresses interest in one of our events. These high impact opportunities are really to get someone's name out, but also typically to let a representative speak in front of our audience. Then we move to visibility. Lots of companies want visibility. They just want their name out in the community. So that, looks like time at the podium, but also just having the table with items out in the registration area. Moving down, we find branding to be more and more popular with our companies. They're not always looking to fill the top table. Sometimes they're just looking for engagement on social media, just like Sydney said earlier. Obviously, social media is not going anywhere, so we really need to just figure out what's the best way to incorporate it into what we're doing here at the Chamber. Access is something I'm sure you're all familiar with. But if you're not, it's an easy benefit to any sponsor. They don't only want their name at the event, they want to personally be at the event for networking and to make sure they're showing face in the community. While those are our typical buckets of benefits, we also just like to be really flexible with our sponsors. Like I said, I will always consider any benefit that someone brings to me. I would never say that our sponsorship packets are black and white because, as we mentioned earlier on, we have some very large companies here represented, but we also have a very large contingency of small businesses. So we need to be flexible in what they're looking for. Maybe that small business can't fill an 8-top table, but maybe they do linens and they'd like to provide the linens for all of our tables and put something in our napkins. Or you can see here on our screen, we have a sponsor who likes to do our charging station. So that's literally, we're just providing folks a place to plug in their phones, but that's where that specific sponsor wanted their dollars to go. So really just get creative. As you can see on our quick tip, creativity is key. And I will say, you know, someone, when I started here, made a joke and they said, "You're welcome to sell anything that isn't nailed down." And I really took that to heart because in this day and age, we do over 60 events a year. And if you think about all these people in your community that are also doing events, you want to stay current, you want to stay fresh. And so consider other options. We have a floor cleaning service as an investor, and we are talking to them about branding the bathrooms at our annual meeting. It might sound strange, but their whole business is cleaning corporate spaces. So a place that needs to be cleaned is the restroom, and that's somewhere where a lot of people are going to visit during an event. Along with customization is definitely our recaps. I mentioned this earlier, but I find it much easier to keep a sponsor than to create a new one. So I like to start this process of keeping a sponsor for the next year with recaps after the event. Our recaps include metrics, photos, promotions, and of course a thank you, but they're pretty in-depth. So I want to just walk you through what one of our recaps really looks like. So this is the presenting sponsor of our annual meeting. I don't know if this is gonna go. We're potentially having some technical difficulties. We are, that's okay. I will say our recaps are fairly in-depth. Like I said, that was our presenting sponsor, and their recap was over 50 pages long for our annual meeting. They made a significant investment, and I wanted them at the end of the year to be able to look at that recap and recognize the return on investment that they received. So that event, our annual meeting, is in February. They're doing their budgets in October. That's a lot of events between A and B. So just make sure that your sponsors are remembering you.
And our last piece of our agenda is what we're going to talk about is just other non-dues revenue. A few quick ways for investors to get recognition through the Chamber Partnership is through non-dues revenue items. We see this as a major source of revenue in the future, and I'm going to talk about just a few examples we have so far. So one way is just to showcase your investor support. The symbol of Louisville is the fleur-de-lis, and so we worked with a really well-known local pottery company to design a fleur-de-lis wall, which sits outside of our boardroom. Anyone coming into our space will immediately see supporters literally on the wall who have sponsored a section of this iconic image. So just kind of think about what's iconic in your own areas. Is it you know, a bridge that everybody crosses, and how can you take that image and bring it into your own space? Or is it the brick walkway leading up into your space? Just really think of anything that you can sell to your sponsors and your investors for a way for them to showcase their support for your organization. Another thing that we do is the space. We have been, as Alana mentioned earlier, we will sell anything that's not nailed down. So we have, sorry, we're having some pictures that aren't showing up, but those were just a couple of pictures of our conference areas. And we have been selling the naming rights of these spaces within our office. So meeting spaces, CEO conference rooms, if it's here, we will sell it. And lastly is our website advertising. This is a total no-brainer. This is at no cost to you and a great way for even some of the smaller companies to get their name associated with an established brand, which is you. This is easily customizable for your sponsors and their respective budgets. So please don't overlook this as a great source of income.
Now we are going to wrap up. We had a couple of technical difficulties throughout, so we apologize for those. But just to summarize, and so we have enough time for questions, the first piece that we definitely want to highlight is centralize. If you are able to do this, bring all of your sponsorship under one person. Again, Sydney mentioned this, and understanding that every chamber is a different size, if you are able to really focus your sponsorships into one person, it allows someone like me to really just make sure they're concentrating on money in the door. The second piece is customize. Again, not all investors are the same, so think of it that neither should your sponsorship be. You want to make sure that you're not giving your largest investor necessarily the same spiel or presentation or proposal that you're giving a new startup in your community. They both need a place at your chamber, but the place does look different. Stay current. Obviously, you always want to stay up to date with what's happening in your own industry, but also just make sure you're staying up to date with your top investors. So whether they're branching out in a different region or they're having a struggle internally or externally with PR, staying up to date with what they're doing will help you align beneficially with them. The fourth C is cost savings. Definitely, we recommend exploring trades. They can be mutually beneficial. And also just look at your other non-dues revenue. Once we had the established fleur-de-lis in stone, the initial cost was already done. So what we're selling now, there's a small cost associated with it, but really that's money in our door. So definitely look at pieces where you can just add into your bucket of non-dues revenue. I'm sure we're all hearing this phrase all the time now, but non-dues revenue is becoming more and more important. So it's great to get these creative ideas to your leadership team that could help everyone who's working on that piece. The last C of sponsorships is cats. As Susan mentioned, I'm a cat lover, and so I've got a quick last task for you, which is create a thankful sponsor. I like our sponsors to come back and thank us for allowing them to sponsor events. That's my ideal situation. It's happened, so if everybody's saying that never happens, it has happened to me, and it's because of a couple different things. One, I'm dedicated to what exactly they need. So at an event, I'm their dedicated person prior to, and then after, with any questions that they might need to bring back to their leadership to show the return on investment. So I really like to do that piece. I really like to be thankful to our sponsors. I write personal thank you notes to everyone, but you just want to make sure that you are doing as much for them as they are doing for your bottom line. As Susan mentioned, we'll take some questions, which is this slide, but I also just want to leave it on here. Sydney and I are always available for if you need recommendations, or if you have additional questions that you don't want to address here, we're happy to take those via email or on the phone. Or if you're ever in town, we'd love to have you stop by our chamber and chat with us.
Okay, well, Sydney and Alana, thank you for that great presentation and all those great ideas. Folks, if you have questions and you haven't typed them in already, go ahead and type them in the question box, and we'll just go through as many as we can. So I had a couple questions on whether or not folks can see a copy of your initial sponsorship guide, your follow-up flyers or information, and your recap, I know in some cases they couldn't be displayed on the slides. So Sydney and Alana, is it okay if I work with you to try to make copies of those available by posting them with the recording?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll definitely be able to include some of those. Some of our recap just includes information that is private to our sponsors, so I'll remove that. But I'm happy to give a shell. We're always willing to help out other chambers, so we'd love to provide those resources.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I know that will be helpful to everyone. And then some other questions. In terms of event expenses, do you include staff costs in your event expenses?
Staff costs as in kind of time planning. I'm assuming that is the question, not necessarily like, does it cost the person to eat at your event? Actually, no, we do not include that, and we do not break that down into our budget. I will say there are a few departments within our organization who are funded by grants. With those departments, we do have to give a breakdown so they can report back specifically to the money that they're being funded by a grant. So yes, we do report staff hours, but for our events team in general, we do not account for those into our event budget. No, they are just in our overall kind of organizational bucket. Our salaries are included in that.
Okay, thanks. What are the most valuable areas on your website for sponsor/trade?
So I think this is in reference to our advertisements available on our website. And our website it functions that if you buy an ad, you can designate it to one specific page. So if you're looking for an ad to just go on our advocacy page or on our entrepreneurial page, you can do that. But right now, our ads go across all of our pages. So we have two different ad spaces, which you would have seen throughout the presentation. One is a left-hand column, and those go across all pages. And then there's a rotating bottom ad that, again, is on all of our pages. We find that the bottom ad is more valuable. People just choose to pay more for that one than the left-hand column. But right now, the majority of our sponsors who are on our website choose to have their ad go across all the pages in our website.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, this participant said, we sold naming rights 10 years ago when we built the space. When can we do that again?
Well, I would say review the contract if you have one with that sponsor. We actually just went through this ourselves. We renovated our space about 5 years ago and sold the naming rights to our boardroom. So we had to do a little bit of digging because the person that sold that is no longer at GLI. So we really had to delve deep into kind of the vaults of our online or of our department's drive, but was able to kind of find that. And then so Alana has reached back out and has successfully sold the boardroom sponsorship again. So again, I would just take a look at your contract, see if it's up. If you can't find a contract, that probably means that it's up and you should sell it.
Yeah, and we definitely, 10 years is a long time, so I would say no matter what, you're probably all set to go on reselling that one, but definitely go for a renewal first. Show that person what it meant to have their name up there for 10 years. But yes, we will now be keeping a close track on those, and our contracts are actually only a 3-year contract for the space. So we do renew ours every 3 years from now on.
Okay. Great information. Next question. A lot of chambers use a total resource campaign. Do you use volunteers in any way for securing sponsorships?
So we used to have a TRC is what we internally called it, as as I'm sure a lot of you guys do. And we moved away from that probably, I don't know, 3 to 5 years ago. We do use our volunteers. We call them our GLI ambassadors. However, they don't sell our sponsorships. We used to have a very strong tie and kind of compensation for those volunteers who would then go on a TRC kind of, award trip, depending on how much they sold. And we just decided to move away from that model. We have a very strong investment team that was brought in, and so they are responsible for selling, as Alana is on that investment team. And so we no longer ask our volunteers specifically to sell sponsorships. Now, if they are meeting with somebody, a new investor, and make that introduction, we kind of just give them kudos, but not necessarily a monetary kind of exchange for their help.
Okay.
We're happy to receive any sort of introduction to a potential sponsor, though, for sure. We're not going to turn that away.
Sure. Do you allow non-members to sponsor events, or do you have to be a member of the chamber to have the privilege of sponsoring a GLI event?
Yes, so we do allow non-members to sponsor events. That being said, we do give preferential treatment, of course, to all of our investors. And I will say you have to be an investor for some of our other non-dues revenue. For instance, our products, you have to be an investor. But we did move away from restricting it, understanding that if someone has, a budget for us and they maybe really are interested in sponsoring an event, then we want to still see that revenue come through, and no matter what door that it's coming through.
And I would just kind of piggyback on that and say, while that is an open option, they're very few and far between. And again, kind of that collaboration with Alana being on the investor team, she immediately will then go to a sales manager and say, this person is interested in sponsoring this event. Please chat with them about their investorship within GLI. And I would say 99% of the time that they then come on as an investor. So it's almost a great lead into a membership to our organization as well.
Okay. How many total sponsors do you have, and how many companies are active prospects?
That's a great question. It's interesting because there's two different numbers. We have several companies that sponsor numerous events. So I wouldn't necessarily, it would really depend on if you're looking for unique sponsors versus your total number. But within a year, we probably have upwards of 150 sponsors in total, so that's repeat sponsors as well. To give you an idea, we had about 45 sponsors just for our annual meeting, which is our largest meeting of the year, so that takes a good chunk. And then I'd say we have to fill in the rest between 150 and 200 sponsors. And then kind of reducing that down, I would say we probably have between 70 and 95 unique sponsors. And then my prospect list is pretty long right now. Just because I am new to the role, I am making my way very methodically through our top investors. So I am looking to talk to every single top investor that we have and then move into our core bucket. So Sydney mentioned that we have about 1,500 investors, and that's continually growing. So my prospect list is probably about 1,000 strong right now, just because I'm moving down. And, some people might be thinking, okay, that's not really realistic. But right now, I just pick a good section each week, and I reach out and say, can I sit down with you? And some say no, and some immediately say, yes, that would be great. We've been looking to get more involved. So I think anybody's prospect list should be your full investor pool.
And I will say that it's been great having Alana in this role. To be honest with you, we were without a sponsorship manager for about a year, and she's really come in guns blazing, has a lot of really unique ideas, and is not afraid to reach out to somebody who has not sponsored something in the past. I'm sure a lot of you can get super comfortable with, hey, this company has, again, we've had the same sponsor for 20 years in one of our programs, and that's great. We want them for another 20. And sometimes it's difficult asking the person who hasn't been engaged with GLI yet if they want to pony up some money. And Alana has no fear of doing that, and has done a really great job of reaching outside of her the normal kind of comfort box. So really just think about, you know, those people that may only come to the event once a year, but reaching out to them and seeing if they need to come to more events and how they can get more plugged in, because the more actively engaged they are, the more likely that they're going to turn around and become a sponsor for you.
Okay, love it. Love 1,000 member prospect list. That's awesome. Okay, how do you record and report trade revenue?
Great question. So we do, well, first of all, we have everything, of course, in a CRM, and then we also do build in what that trade is into our revenues. So we had one person who their main focus was just our trades. We do have probably upwards of 50 to 70 trades throughout the year, and those are all looking different. Not every trade is as great as the 50 down to 20 for our ABM annual meeting. But we do track those internally to make sure that revenue is captured.
A lot of them are also in kind of bundled with their investment dollars. So, you know, if a small business doesn't have the amount to do both sponsorship and become a GLI investor, sometimes we will give them a comp membership if they are still willing to give us certain trades for venues, for their services, you know, for motor coaches, if we're moving a group of our folks, or catering services or something of the like. So that's included and kind of captured within the investment team, and how that reflects their level of investment within GLI as well.
Okay. How soon after an event do you send the event recap?
Great question. So my typical timeline, and it's sometimes challenging if I have a lot of sponsors for one event, because it does take time as I do customize each one of those proposals. So in the first week, I send a handwritten thank you note, and that goes to the person who, you know, the decision maker who bought the sponsorship, and then I typically like to include one to their assistant or executive manager, because really, as many of you will know, that's the person doing the legwork to get you all of the information that you need to activate their sponsorship. So I get that out in the first week. And then depending on the event, I like to get the recap out within 2 weeks of the event. So, you know, that's flexible. If I don't hit it in 2 weeks, it's okay, because there are some weeks where we'll have 3 or 4 events, and just being able to get all of that information while also, you know, getting ready for the events that are coming up is sometimes challenging. I will say I made a push for our annual meeting, and I was able to get those all out within 3 weeks, and we had upwards of 40 sponsors. But some of the information also is not available until a week to 2 weeks after the event. For instance, for all of our events, we do surveys. We leave those open for at least a week. But I will say, when you're looking at your recaps and when I send out our structure for them, I'm collecting that from the minute that we announce the event to the night of the event. So I'm collecting all of that information. And at a certain point, it's a plug and chug where you're just putting it into a specific format, but it's a lot more challenging if you, 2 weeks after the event, if you go back and try to, you know, oh, when did we send out that email, or when did we post to social media? I keep a folder on my desktop and I just toss all that in, and then once we get the professional photos and our survey results is when I put it, compile it all into one package.
Okay. In addition to sponsorship for events, do you have annual investors? And if so, what are the benefits they receive?
I'm a little confused, I guess, on the question. With annual investors, I assume that just means investors in our organization. And yes, that is a completely separate budget item and a separate team. So we have a sales team that goes out and actively solicits investment within our organization, and that funds kind of all of our hard costs, our staff time, our office, everything like that. So what we've just talked about is sponsorship specifically for our events and our products. So yes, those are kind of separate. Well, actually, they are separate and have separate functions. So the sponsorship is solely to make money and cover the cost of our events, where the investment of the organization is able to cover the cost of our initiatives and growing our economy and growing our community.
And
so when you say
highlight
investors, you mean your membership? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And just to highlight a couple of the benefits you get as a investor or a member, and that's an annual subscription. Some of our events are, you can only go to those if you are investors, so that type of eligibility is included. You can also use, of course, all of our conference rooms. You can do access to sponsorship and advertising opportunities. You get all of our monthly newsletters, which include highlights from all of our different divisions, including economic development and advocacy. Ribbon cuttings are also always available to our members, so if you're having a grand opening or a reopening, things like that. And of course, 24/7 website exposure, so you get listed on our website, and you also get onto our top list if someone calls and they're looking for a home renovator or a realtor. Depending on your investment level, that's how we decide who gets that call first. So top investors are always get first benefits to those requests, and then it moves down into our core group.
Okay. And a related question, as the sponsorship manager, how do you work with the membership team or the investment sales team? Because this person sees membership retention going hand in hand with sponsorship sales.
Yeah, as a sponsorship sales manager, I fall under our VP of investment. So she manages our sales team, which sells all of our investments or memberships for the year. So I work very closely with them, as they are my core team. But I really find myself straddling between that team and the events team. And through our CRM, I really interact with them quite often just when I'm approaching new companies. As Sydney mentioned, I am not shy about reaching out to a new company who is not a sponsor but is an investor, but I do like to chat with their main contact first, just to make sure that there's nothing missing from their CRM notes, or maybe they have a very good relationship and we should all meet together. And this is definitely a symbiotic relationship. As Sydney mentioned, if I bring in someone that is not an investor, or someone who reaches out to us to sponsor an event and they're not included in our investors, I always bring someone from that team, because I'm definitely not an expert on all of the benefits that they receive and vice versa. So I work very closely with them, but we don't see, or say we haven't seen during my time here someone that pulls their investment to then put it into sponsorship. We find a way to allow them to do both.
And then I would also just add that when our investment team is out actively selling or for renewals or to join GLI, they definitely mention sponsorships as a way to get engaged and a way for them to advertise within the business community. So they'll have those initial meetings or renewal meetings and then bring that information back to Alana, and then she'll be able to follow up again with that customized proposal after our investment team has talked to them and said, hey, we're really interested in sponsoring a workforce event. Then she can already have that knowledge and send specific customized proposals for specific workforce events that we're having. So they work very, very closely.
Okay. A couple questions about your events. One of our participants would love some examples of discontinued events and whether they are annual events or recurring events. And then a related question is, what are the main benefits from reducing the amount of events per year?
Sure. So we did a lot of small business kind of professional development. And so we had a whole series called our How-To series, and that was about a 6 times a year event that we did. We did everything from how to market your company to how to use a website to how to network, and just really ran the gamut. That was a successful program for a number of years. And then we started seeing a decline in our revenue generated from that event specifically. And we also just asked our investors, are you interested in seeing this program continue? And more of them started telling us that they were receiving this professional development in other areas within our community. There's tons of, you could not go, you could go every day to something new in our community because everybody is hosting events and programming. So we just totally released that and let other people lead the way for a little while. It may come back to us, but not right now. We also used to have programming specifically around international professionals. That may also come back in our realm, but right now we've kind of let the mayor's office and our city officials take that under their wing. So sometimes it's not totally eliminating the program, it's finding a new home for them. And then, Susan, I'm sorry, the benefit of reducing. I really think that it enables your team to have better quality events rather than struggle just to produce over and over again. I think a lot of people get stale in their programming. Our CEO is amazing at pushing us outside of our comfort zone and really thinking of new ways to do things. And so, don't just do something because you've done it for 20, 30 years or for 5 years for that matter. Another event that we cut, we used to have an event called the Business of Bourbon. There's all kinds of bourbon events you can find in Louisville for sure, but nobody was really focusing on the business side of it, the glass makers who are making the bottles, the folks that are making the stills, the tour companies that have a business surrounded the bourbon industry. And so we had a very successful program around that for about 4 years. And then again, it just kind of ran its course. So we may bring it back. It was a lot of work, a super fun event, but it just kind of, we were ready to say goodbye to it. So don't hold on to something just because you've always done it, or don't also hold on to a program in one way without thinking, hey, I can think of this in a new fashion. How else can we shake this up and make it a new experience for our attendees?
Okay, I think we'll squeeze in one more question. I think we have about a minute left, so one more question. Can you please share the sponsorship opportunities for your annual meeting? 45 sponsors is a massive amount. So what do you sponsor for annual meeting?
Yeah, so we have several different levels, but I will say annual meeting, when I started January 2nd, and annual meeting was just the next month, and we had about, I think, $60,000 left on it, and so we really I just needed to be creative, and so we have Port Seller presenting sponsor, and I will say that is our top sponsorship. It gives you a lot of play in the business community. We have over 1,000 people at that event, and the people who aren't there are reading about it in some form or another in a local newspaper. So that's the first one. We have a large section of platinum sponsorships. We have two different receptions at that event. So there's a reception for our top investors, which one person sponsors, and then there's a reception for everybody else that gets another sponsorship. We then have our gold level. You know, you typically see our silver, which is going to include your 8 top tables, but then also different marketing. Sydney mentioned at one point ads in our program. And then you get down to just our bronze level, which is essentially a table sponsorship with a little extra meat behind it in terms of marketing. But then outside of that, we did some other sponsorships. We did a co-check sponsor, so that's exactly what it sounds like. A local dry cleaner came in and they sponsored our coat check. So they had all their hangers, they had their information, and then they put a coupon in everyone's pocket as they were leaving. So it, you know, they thought of them, and it was at the end of February. People were, you know, almost into spring, considering getting their jackets clean, things like that. We had a keynote speaker sponsor, which, again, self-explanatory, sponsored our keynote, but they were able to have an intimate breakfast with him prior to our event, a dinner with him the night before. He was a really big deal here. He's a futurist, so people were excited to see him. And again, he has a strong technology focus and talked about where technology will play in the business community. We had a Wi-Fi sponsor, so again, self-explanatory, but that company literally just put their name on our Wi-Fi, but anybody logging into that system would have to type in their name. So it's just play for them. And then next year, like I said, I'm going to really push hard to get that corporate cleaning to sponsor. And then, of course, we also have bar sponsors. We are Bourbon Town, so we don't struggle to find those. And so Jim Beam was our sponsor for that, and they brought in a full bar, not only the liquor, but also the setup. So a pretty significant sponsorship there as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sydney and Alana, for the great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for your good, really good questions, thoughtful questions. And I'll just let you all know again that we'll work on getting some of the information, their sponsorship guide and recap information. We'll post that with the webinar recording or get it to you somehow so that you have that in hand. And again, thank you so much to our presenters for making that available. A reminder that the webinar was recorded, and I'll post the recording along with a copy of the presentation on our ACCE webinar page, and you can find that no later than Monday, April 29th. You can find that page by going to our website, www.acce.org, hovering over ACC University Online, and then clicking on webinars. So you'll find it fairly easily there, and along with all the rest of our webinars we've done for the past year or more, click on the icon to listen. Our next live webinar will be on Thursday, May 9th, and it will be the final in our From the Winner's Circle series featuring Chamber of the Year Award winners from last year. The Charleston Metro team will present on how their chamber is working alongside regional partners, including educators and the business community, to facilitate educational change and produce the talent needed to fill high-demand jobs. So you can register for that webinar on our events page. You can get to it by clicking on professional development, hovering over events, and then navigating to and clicking on upcoming webinars. You'll also get an e-blast about that. So again, thank you, Sydney and Lana, for taking the time to present today's webinar. Thank you to everyone for your participation. I'm wishing everyone a great afternoon, and we will see you at the next ACC University webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you.